Good day, everybody. How's it going this week? Well, I really do plan on covering my time at Worldwide Fur Camp that I did in early October at some point in time, but things just keep coming up. Some real weird big news things just keep coming up, and so I have to keep on trudging along. In the recent days, there's been this whole uh, big zoophile ring thing that was kind of crazy. Now it's sort of like one of the biggest financial sort of issues that has occurred in the fandom since I've been around, to the tune of about $35,000. Usually when I talk about furry crime and things like that in previous videos, where the rarer instances of a violent crime occurred within the furry fandom back in September of 2016. I noted that such heinous and violent crimes are typically pretty rare in the furry fandom. More often than not, if you're talking about activities that are not necessarily moral or legal, usually it sort of has the same sort of deprivations as normal society. Typically, most of the crimes that occur are around things like petite larceny or minor fraud, such as interactions between a commissioner and their artist, and miscommunications, and downright taking the money and running, or not providing the money after getting a product, things such as that. And there's a lot of furry sites out there that are trying to alleviate those situations, such as either Furry Network has been trying to make sort of an escrow system, and same thing with the Artconomy website, another recent one that's sort of come up to play in this, to try and alleviate some of those sort of pressures. So it's very, very strange to have sort of a financial brouhaha, financial situation that comes up that's well over like the $10,000 mark. Usually furry art doesn't go for that expensive. You guys get pretty cheap art, all right? You get good, you got artists who are chomping at the bit to get their name out there. And they offer pretty deep discounts for what artists usually go for their particular skill. It is a luxury item after all. But furries are typically very nice in keeping their prices pretty low, as opposed to the mainstream. So, that being said, how did it get that? How did it get to 35,000? Well, it wasn't around something as simple or as small as furry art this time, or even fursuits, because the most expensive fursuit that was sold in auction was about $18,000 at this point. So it wasn't even dealing with fursuits, because fursuits don't even get that expensive. It had to do with something that was a pretty unique trial for the fandom, and unfortunately it sort of went flat on its face. And that has to do with traveling. Traveling to furry conventions is sort of a market that sort of isn't really thought of too much, because usually it's something that furries handle on an individual basis. How they get from point A to point B to get to the furry convention they want to hang out at. Basically, because it depends on where you start, and it depends on where the convention is. And those are two different variables that can change depending on the convention, depending on the things. Like, there's the option of the train, the plane, the automobile. I've done all three, and they all have their strengths and they all have their weaknesses. So, that being said, I could go over those strengths and weaknesses, but that's a whole other video for a whole other time. Today we're going to be talking about a group of furries that wanted to utilize the desire for furries to get to, basically to get to the convention spaces and try to create a sort of idea based around traveling to furry conventions. So FurFlight arrived on the scene at around... It is a relatively short-lived company. It started its initial pilot flight. Because there's pilots. See? That's the only one that makes sense. So they did their initial pilot flight in 2017. Last year's Midwest Fur Fest was their initial pilot flight. When it first was announced, the people who staffed actual furry convention MFF, it sounds like they were a bit like taken aback and were very told furries to take very much due caution when utilizing the FurFlight service, as it was not backed by Midwest Fur Fest. They called it Midwest FurFlight, and because that's closer, that name sort of has a close tie with Midwest Fur Fest. There was concerns that there would be some confusion that the two organizations were tied or affiliated, which they were not. The people working to book these furry flights were a separate entity altogether. Long and the short, they had a, what I'm going to put in quotes, successful first year, where they were able to get these furries onto their flight together and fly it out there. It was covered by Dogpatch Press. It was covered by a bunch of other media outlets. Not mine, because I basically was covering other things at the time, and I don't know why. Like I'm not quite sure, but obviously I dodged a bullet here. So they had the FurFlight. Now, so here we have these guys. Here in this particular ad, you could see that they're trying to expand. This one's a little advertisement for their flights to Biggest Little Fur Con of 2019. So basically, after their successful, in quotes, year of 2017, they redid it. They went to do it again for 2018 Midwest Fur Fest this year. And also, at the same time, it seems like they're aggressively expanding to try and make to Booker flights for Furry Weekend Atlanta and Biggest Little Fur Con and all the larger furry cons, other than Anthrocon. I didn't see any pressure from them to try and get to Anthrocon. They did go for Texas Furry Fiesta and all that other stuff. Probably because Pittsburgh's probably hard to fly into. I haven't tried flying into Pittsburgh yet because I've always been in driving range, so like it's not a big deal for me to drive there. So that being said, this advertisement here that you're seeing right now is not going to happen. Mostly because of an issue that came up during the run-up to their 2018 Midwest Fur Fest flight. Now, if you happen to be a rare individual who booked with these guys and is watching my channel and doesn't know about this news story, which has been going on for about 2 weeks now, a week and a half, welcome, and you may want to make other arrangements because there was issues that went abound here. A person named Aloha Wolf did a LiveJournal post. LiveJournal, for those of you who are not aware, was like a social media platform before Twitter and Facebook, and it was bought out by the Russian government. Like it was bought by the Russians in 2010ish. So yeah, it was a lot of furries used it before the Twitterverse came about. Even I have my own LiveJournal. It's embarrassing to look at, so I'm not going to share it. You could find it yourself if you want to, but yeah, it's filled with normal stuff that college social media people would do. So, anyways, here is Aloha Wolf's LiveJournal covering an issue that occurred. Basically, the leader of the FurFlight idea came to him and said, well, we're having issues trying to get money into this particular thing. Could you loan us this money and we'll pay you back within a short order? It's just a technical issue. Like our banks won't allow us to bring over all that money for some reason. So if you could help us out, Aloha, that'd be great. So Aloha helped them out in early October. And they expected to get paid back pretty readily, because the money that these guys took in from other people was supposed to be escrowed. Basically, let's say I wanted to pay for a FurFlight ticket I would give them some money. They're supposed to keep a hold of that money and then pay for the tickets when they're readily available. And pay for them in that block and then subject that block to the FurFlight. Problem is the apparent alleged problem, according to the person who was working that at that time, was like, oh, well, they won't let me transfer all that money all at once. So if you could like use your card in order to try and pay this thing, and then we'll pay you back directly, and the banks will be more easy about that. So first off, to me, that raises red flags because it's like, so why would the bank allow the transfer of money one way but not the other way? It just seems kind of weird. I don't know. But Aloha Wolf obliged and transferred that money for him on the tone of around $35,000. Which, I don't know, man. I'm a bleeding heart furry as much as the next person. I'm not giving out, I don't care how well I know that person. I'm not giving him $35,000. But anyway, that aside, so he waited for money to come back to his account, as was promised. And it never really happened. So Aloha, after like a few weeks, was like, okay, guys, what's up? And then apparently, according to the live journal quote, as you can see below, the guy confessed that, well, the finances aren't looking too hot. And Aloha's like, well, let me look at your finances to see how salvageable this is. Because some guy who could put $35,000 on a credit card probably knows a little bit about finances. I don't know who he is or what he does, but dang, man. Like, I'm not even that good. I would be capped quite hard, even with my score. So basically, he noted here that there wasn't really any budget to speak of. There was not really any financial business planning that seemed to thinking of the long term. Instead, it seemed like they were short-ending themselves to get butts in the seats, and there wasn't even any breaking even. It was a loss. He was selling these seats at a loss, including the ones that he was going to sell in 2019. Some larger businesses do operate at a loss for quite a few years. In fact, Twitter itself operated at a loss for quite a few years before it became profitable. So that is a thing that you have to be aware of when you're starting a business, and sometimes you do operate at a loss, but you should always have some sort of plan as to how to bleed that loss into a gain. Unfortunately, when the books are revealed like this, then in a public manner, obviously that puts a hindrance on that because it makes people lose faith in your organization. But at the same time, you really you can't rely on other people's money to invest on it involuntarily. Like, that's just not kosher at all, obviously. Like, you don't tell somebody that, oh, I'm going to borrow this money from you and give it back to you really quickly when you have no intention of doing so. That's obviously really scummy. Needless to say, Aloha Wolf did do a chargeback on that credit that he gave to FurFlight, and he did get that chargeback. So now FurFlight's sort of on their own when dealing with the situation. Needless to say, as soon as that person came clean, like Aloha Wolf came forward, another person came forward indicating that 2017 flight that was made by FurFlight wasn't necessarily as successful as they might have gleaned it on from the public side. That they were out about $5,000 to plug a hole that they had created for themselves during that particular instance. And yeah, it looks pretty bad because that's obviously a pattern of behavior, that it went from a $5,000 loss in 2017 to a $35,000 loss in 2018, and keeping that trend going, obviously a company can't really stay afloat. That being said, as more and more people became more stringent upon, that these guys are not in the up and up, that their company is basically underwater. A lot of people have been asking for refunds, and apparently the lead operator is away on sick leave, and they've been for a while. I haven't had any updates as to whether or not they've come back or not. on their public-facing Twitter, they're what they called volunteers. The FurFlight volunteers released an unofficial statement. The MFF flight currently is no more. We urge all of our customers to call Alaska for their confirmation. Currently, refunds are on hold, and if you have any trouble with a chargeback, please contact us. So basically, at this point, they're saying that they're obviously abandoning the entire premise of the FurFlight. Apparently, the individual who's in charge of the entire operation has been on medical leave, dealing with medical issues, probably stress. My God. But so in essence, like they're saying that, you know, they'll try and refund the money as best as they can. Obviously, according to Aloha Wolf's statements, they might not have the money in hand because it was spent on something. It is definitely a very concerning situation. It is probably one of the biggest money holes that I've seen in this fandom for a content creator for basically anything. It certainly is not a record that the furry fandom would want to set for itself. Because this is more than just like, oh, well, this guy didn't give me a piece of artwork I paid $100 for. This is more like, well, we paid to be on a flight for about $150 a piece, and now the money's not there to refund us directly. So, and these guys are not only out, and you know, Boozy did very good coverage on this particular story. There was a bunch of coverage on it. Dogpatch did coverage on it, and that's in the description below. His is more of a personal route, because apparently he has spoken with the operator of this company personally and directly. So it's more of a personal account, and so Dogpatch says that this person is not really a criminal or anything like that. They're not really the kind of person that would do something like, you know, take a money and run. They were probably fully into investing in what this was, but didn't have the skill set in order to make the liquid, to make it not always like profitable, like some big company trying to gobble up all the profits, but even like just keeping their head above water, like being able to operate and keep it at least the books even, right, instead of being a huge loss sink. Which unfortunately, when you're dealing with this kind of situation, is very important to deal with. Boozy Badger did a interesting article on it as well, also in the description below, regarding the legal sense and the legal sort of position that this company LLC finds themselves in. And it's not really a good picture. Particularly, and he wrote this before this tweet was made, where FurFlight was like, okay, we're backing off, and we're gonna, you know, take our losses and refund this stuff. This was just before that, and this was when it was considering, he was just talking about FurFlight as an LLC, and the law, and it's a Californian LLC, which has its own laws and stipulations on, you know, what is expected of a travel agency or some sort of travel agent company, and what sort of quality of products they're supposed to provide to their customers, and the timings of everything. There's a bunch of laws actually revolving around it, and he goes into very good detail about that in the description below, and kind of goes over the details as to what legal trouble an organization like this could find themselves in, since they are a LLC and they're working out of that and taking money for traveling services that they might not have been able to provide on. So that being said, this tweet here ended up in as a follow-up sort of tweet. He didn't really update the article, but Boozy was like, you're an LLC and you have volunteers? Like that sort of question, like, oh, so not only does this LLC have problems on the customer side of things, where they might not have provided the product that they were able to provide their customer in the manner that is, you know, within the laws that they have. There's also this issue where the having volunteers work for your company is not a legally acceptable thing to do. If your company is a for-profit sort of company, it's an LLC and not like a sort of a non-profit organization. Having volunteers work for you is not necessarily a viable option. In fact, it might be kind of illegal. So, then he has an issue on the worker side too. If people volunteered for him and they should have been being paid the whole time, that's another issue in and of itself. So it's a big mess. It's a big, ugly, ugly mess. I think one of the biggest things that somebody noted is that, like, airlines don't operate on huge profit margins at this time anyway. Mostly because they want to get as many butts in those seats as possible, because the more butts you have in those seats, the more money you have, per plane ride, which is the most important thing, because it takes gas, it takes maintenance, it takes staff, it takes all these things for each individual flight. Inspecting the plane, all these different things have to go into each and every flight. So getting more butts in those seats is the best thing you could do as an airline. So when it comes to ticket prices, they might not be operating at such a high profit margin. They might charge you a bunch of extras for, like, oh, you want a checked bag? Oh, well, that's going to be an extra $60. Oh, you want nice food? Well, that's going to be an extra $50. Though that kind of nickel and diming. Me personally, I'm fine with that, because it's like, if you play it and what the finances are and you know what's coming, then you could kind of do a play for it. If you play it right, a plane ride can be cheaper than driving, particularly if you're talking about more than an 8-hour trip on road. Mostly because you have to take into consideration when you're driving, stops for gas, stops for food. If it's a long enough trip, you have to sleep, so that's motels costs and all this other stuff. Train rides, interestingly, like when I was going from Syracuse to Chicago, the train cost and the plane cost were about the same. But one was faster. The plane was a lot faster. A lot more inconvenient getting on, and kind of annoying having to take everything off and put it into those boxes and go through the TSA line. That's an annoyance, but it was, it's much quicker, and it was actually, much more convenient to get to and from the hotel to the airport, as opposed to getting to Grand Union Station to the hotel. Anyways, that's kind of a non sequitur in this case. But what we're saying is that taking that idea of trying to get a block of furries into one particular thing to travel together with other furry fans isn't a horrible idea. It is something that a lot of furries would like to see. I've noticed, and they do think it's a great idea. Unfortunately, the execution here wasn't the greatest. In fact, they probably should have looked at trains first, because if you're going to pay a premium to sort of block out seating for individual furry fans, Amtrak offers like discounts if you get a group of 20 people all together to do that. So that's a good starting point. Like, trains don't have as much margins to take into consideration as planes do. They've got a lot more seats to put a lot more butts into, so they would obviously like to get as many butts in as many seats as possible as well, because it's better for them. But they would probably operate at more of a margin than the plane would, so there's a lot more wiggle room. And on top of that, if a furry is going to pay a premium, then they'd have a lot more time to interact with said fellow furries over a 13-hour train ride than they would over like a 3-hour plane ride. So you gotta think about stuff like that. Anyways, it's more like backseat coaching, I suppose. But obviously this group has got to get its act together, because unfortunately in this case, it's like, well, these guys are evil, they should be brought to justice and stuff like that. And it's like, well, they're not evil, but yeah, like I think when I think about these kind of guys, I think it's sort of more like an Elmira syndrome. Because if you've never watched Tiny Toons, or if you're familiar with the cartoon character of Elmira, it's like, is she evil? Well, to those animals that she loves to death, yeah, she could seem pretty vicious and evil, but her behavior is acting out of love. Like, she loves these animals, fuzzy animals, so much that she hugs them and squeezes them and loves them to death. And in this case, I think that the person's heart was in the right place, but their ability to actually take care of the situation, to care and treat for the actual problem at hand, was not in the range in which they have actually did like, basically they gave their love, but they couldn't do it in such a way where it benefited the thing that they loved, right? They had a passion for what they did. It was a passion project, and it got out of hand, and they didn't want to disappoint people, and because they put that expectation on themselves. And that's the problem when people fall into that trap. But you have to realize that when you're going into larger things that affect other furries in a larger manner, such as travel, you got to take a step back and go, am I capable of doing this? And as soon as you realize that you're not, then you take a step back and you reevaluate. In this case, after the flight of 2017, FurFlight probably should have went into its thoughts and went, well, we were $5,000 in the hole when we tried to do this particular flight in 2017. We need to take a step back, reevaluate what went wrong, and figure out a way that we can make this a more profitable venture, but not profitable for the sake of exploiting fellow furries and taking their money and gobbling it up and getting rich off of their desire to travel with each other, but more like being able to be reliable and be able to be a thing where they can rely that their tickets are good and rely that they can get from point A to point B without too much trouble, or without feeling like they, as passengers, are exploiting individuals within the fandom to subsidize their flights. And because it is sort of a terrible situation for them to feel like, oh, well, you know, now we got to figure out how to get to Midwest Fur Fest in less than a month. And that's sort of a very hard position to be in. But anyways, so if you are in that position, feel free to kick a comment in the comment section if this sort of thing had impacted your flight. But anyways, thank you very much for watching. I think we covered this to death, a large amount of it. Additional articles about it will be in the description below from Dogpatch and Boozy Badger. Thank you very much for watching. If you like this kind of content, kick that like, hit the subscribe button, kick a comment in the comment section, and I will see you next time.